Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be back with you again for our next video feed from Sheer Fertility Solutions. As you know, I've switched from Sheer IVF to Sheer Fertility Solutions about 2 weeks ago. And I'm having a wonderful time consulting with people all over the world. It's just amazing at the demand. I think the demand for consultations with me has quadrupled since I moved to Sheer Fertility Solutions. And I think it's largely due to the fact that people realize that the advice I give and the consultations provided from this source does not require or even imply or even have the opportunity to come to Vegas for treatment with me. So in effect, people that get my advice through Sheer Fertility Solutions simply come for that advice, and I consult with them by Skype for a period of an hour, and follow that I generate a report, send it to them that they can use anywhere they wish. They can hand it over to their doctors, or they can have their doctors even contact me if they like. And if they can't find a doctor, or they're not comfortable with their current reproductive endocrinologist, I'll help them find one if I can. As far as testing that may be required that I need following these consultations to reach a final decision, and those tests can be requisitioned by their own doctors or your own doctors, or if you're unable to do so, then I can step in and help as well. What I'm doing is I'm going to be reporting on interesting cases I confront through Sheer Fertility Solutions, obviously, and for obvious reasons. The names and identities of the people will be kept anonymous, so I'll use fictitious names. But the cases will be the cases reported on my blog in written form as well. And I'm trying to put out one a week or one every 2 weeks at the latest, so that people can get an idea of the interesting patients I tend to consult with and decide whether or not the problem that you have might benefit from talking to me. All right, the fictitious names I've used for the case today, my second case through Sheer Fertility Solutions, is Beryl, and the husband's name is Jack. Beryl was 39 years of age when I consulted with her via Skype a week ago. Jack, 36. The couple had been really grappling with the problem of having a baby for 5 years. They'd never achieved a pregnancy in the past. They'd been unable to conceive in spite of the fact that Jack had perfectly normal sperm. Beryl had patent and normal fallopian tubes. Beryl had a healthy uterus and was menstruating regularly, and based upon symptomatology was clearly ovulating every month as well. She did have a condition called Hashimoto's disease. Hashimoto's disease is an autoimmune thyroid condition where the woman produces antibodies to her own thyroid gland. This is usually genetically transmitted. It usually occurs more commonly in women, and if the woman has got the condition, someone in her family on her mother's side usually transmitted it. It's much more common in women, 10 times more common than in men. Interestingly, 2 to 5% of the population have reduced thyroid function. And when there is reduced thyroid activity, it's about 60 to 70% of the cases that are due to this Hashimoto's condition. And as I said, these antibodies attack the thyroid gland and slowly replace the glandular hormone-producing tissue in the thyroid with connective tissue or collagen. The net effect is that eventually the thyroid runs out of steam, and eventually, if it goes untreated with thyroid hormone replacement therapy, then ultimately the woman will become hypothyroid, and that is something you want to avoid, because once those features of hypothyroidism develop, they're hard to reverse. So it's important to try to pick it up. And the way we pick it up, and the first sign, is that the woman will present, usually before she's hypothyroid, with elevated blood thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH levels. And sometimes another giveaway is that they've got raised blood prolactin levels. The reason for the prolactin being raised is because the high TSH levels that go along with the early stages of this condition are brought about by the release of a very small peptide hormone from an area in the brain called the hypothalamus. And this peptide substance is known as TRH, or thyroid releasing hormone. It so happens that it is also the hormone that causes increased production of prolactin by the pituitary gland. So if you see a woman with an unexplained rise in prolactin and a TSH is elevated, it usually suggests she's got an underlying thyroid condition, which if left untreated for long enough will eventually end up with hypothyroidism in the woman. Okay, we'll come back to that in a few moments, especially the issue of the thyroid antibodies, of which there are thyroglobulin, microsomal, and TPO antibodies. Well, in the case of Beryl, she had Hashimoto's disease with full-blown thyroid dysfunction, and she was on thyroxine replacement therapy. She also did happen to have a raised prolactin level. Another very important aspect of Beryl's condition was that she had diminished ovarian reserve. Both her AMH and her FSH levels were reflective thereof. The AMH was 0.7 nanograms per milliliter. The normal is over 2. And her FSH was around 14 milli-international units per milliliter with a normal under 9. All of these were consistent then with the fact that she was running out of eggs, doing it earlier than one had expected it would normally occur, but she was running out of eggs. And this translated into a very difficult stimulation, which she did receive for 2 IVF attempts she underwent. Her first cycle of stimulation with a relatively high dose stimulation propagated 9 follicles, of which produced 3 mature eggs. And a second cycle propagated 4 mature eggs, and these came from about 10 follicles overall. These 5 mature eggs combined produced 2 blastocysts, advanced embryos that had gone beyond day 5 or day 6, and were then transferred to a uterus, which was normal by all testing which preceded the transfer, including a sonohystogram or a saline water ultrasound and a variety of other tests. She did not conceive with the transfer of these embryos. And again, just for the sake of the record, no genetic testing was done, which in this case I think was an error of omission. So in summary, here we have a couple that have been wanting to have a baby for 5 years with no apparent explanation on the face of things. They were labeled as unexplained IVF failure, when in reality there were very good explanations for her problem. The first was her diminished ovarian reserve and the poor response to stimulation. And the second was that she had an autoimmune condition associated with anti-thyroid antibodies. And those are the 2 conditions I want to dwell on for a few moments. Let's first talk about the most important issue, because if you can't produce good seeds or embryos, blastocysts, it doesn't matter how good the soil is you plant it in. In other words, it doesn't matter how receptive the endometrium is, you can't plant a seed on bedrock. So the bottom line is that she didn't have good embryos because she didn't produce good quality eggs. And the question is why? Well, there are 2 reasons why. The first reason is she was running out of eggs. And a woman of 39 will only have about 1 in 5 eggs being potentially normal, able to produce embryos that can make a baby, competent embryos that are chromosomally normal. So there was, with so few eggs being produced, far fewer eggs than one would have liked to work with to start with. So when these eggs were then fertilized, they would produce fewer embryos, and so it was that out of her total of 5 mature eggs, she only produced 2 blastocysts, neither of which propagated a pregnancy. The reason for this diminished ovarian reserve is a natural process of attrition of eggs that occurs in all women as they get closer to the menopause. The second issue is that the older a woman becomes, the poorer the quality of those eggs, the more likely they are to be chromosomally abnormal. The best you're going to do is about 1 in 2 are normal in young women in their late 20s and early 30s. And when you get to 40, about 1 in 5 is normal. And when you get to 45, probably fewer than 1 in 25 is normal. So the older you get, the more likely it is that the eggs are going to be incompetent because of chromosomal irregularities. There's nothing anyone can do to reverse the effect of age. There's also nothing anyone can do to improve the ovarian reserve. There are no medications you can use. You can't use things like DHEA, they're not going to help. You can't use supplements to improve it, it won't work. There's no surgical approach that improves a woman's ovarian reserve either. You're stuck with what you've got. But the key and the secret and the bottom line is that you've got to try to optimize the chances of any eggs being produced being chromosomally normal when they're extracted, and therefore having the best potential to fertilize in an orderly fashion and produce embryos that can make babies. For an embryo to be able to propagate a viable, healthy baby, the embryo has to have exactly 46 chromosomes. It cannot have less or more. If it has less or more, it is incompetent or aneuploid. It's very important, therefore, that we do everything we can to protect the ability of those eggs that go into the race with the potential to come out competent, and that we do that in a very, very strategic and individualized way. In the case of Beryl, she'd been placed on protocols called flare protocols. And with this protocol, a woman's given Lupron or an equivalent drug like Buserelin or Supervact. As the cycle stimulation begins and the period begins, and this approach causes an expulsion of a large amount of LH from the pituitary gland. Too much LH causes the ovaries to overproduce testosterone, which is needed in small amounts, but overproduce it, and too much testosterone compromises egg and embryo quality. So you end up with a greater likelihood that the embryos resulting from the fertilization of those eggs are going to end up being incompetent and aneuploid. So you don't want to use protocols that allow for too much LH to reach the ovary, such as flare protocols, or such as protocols where you use drugs like clomiphene or letrozole, either alone or in combination during stimulation, because they also expunge LH in larger amounts from the pituitary. And you sure as heck don't want to give the woman drugs like testosterone, because that makes matters worse. And you also don't want to use stimulation protocols that will result in too much LH being delivered. So one of the fertility drugs that are available is called Menopur, and this contains equal amounts of HCG LH to the FSH component. So when you use too much of Menopur, you're also delivering too much LH and you're fanning the flames. You need a different protocol, and what I prescribed, suggested and gave Beryl a detailed accounting of, step by step, the protocol was outlined for her in the report, is called an agonist-antagonist conversion protocol. The woman begins with birth control pills to lower her own production of LH, which it does. It's overlapped with Lupron, which I explained earlier on, is an agonist. For 3 days, we stop the pill, continue the Lupron, period occurs in 5 or 6 days. And then she switches from the Lupron, an agonist, directly to an antagonist. In this case, ganirelix or cetrotide. She takes 250 micrograms a day, starting on the first day of the period and the first day of stimulation. To this I add human growth hormone in small amounts to try to augment egg development. She gets stimulated, and then we follow her through, and as soon as her follicles are adequately developed, remember, we've supplanted the agonist Lupron with the antagonist ganirelix or cetrotide. So we call this the agonist-antagonist conversion protocol. And then when her follicles are fully developed, we trigger her with HCG 10,000 units, not Ovidrel 250 micrograms, which is what she used in her stimulations, because that's too little. And that's not enough to get all of the eggs properly ripened. So you give 10,000 units of HCG in the form of Pregnal, Profasi, or Novarel, or 500 micrograms of Ovidrel. Not 250 micrograms, 500. Ovidrel is simply a recombinant DNA form of HCG. 36 hours later, you extract the eggs. Then the eggs are allowed to be fertilized by injecting a sperm into each egg. We call that intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI. And 5 or 6 days later, we examine to see how many of them have reached the advanced blastocyst stage of development. Those that have now undergo a biopsy, where a small laser rent is made in the shell of the egg into the zona pellucida, and some of the cells on the outer portion of the blastocyst are extracted and sent for analysis by genetic testing. We look to see how many chromosomes are in those cells. There's got to be the right number of chromosomes. If there are too many or too few, that blastocyst is incompetent. If they are normal, and it takes about 12 to 14 days to get the results, we store the embryos for subsequent use and transfer to the woman's uterus, maybe in another cycle. You can't put it back in the same cycle, you don't have enough time. By the time you get the result, it's too late. So you wait for the next cycle or the one thereafter or whenever she chooses. And the embryos can be frozen and stored safely through a process called vitrification that doesn't harm them at all. And then we hold on to those blastocysts until she's ready to have them transferred. This is called pre-implantation genetic screening, where the cells we send off to the genetics lab are analyzed genetically for the number of chromosomes. PGS makes a big difference, and in a woman like Beryl, this is essential. Since there's so few eggs, you want to know how many of them are normal in case you have to repeat the cycle a few times to stockpile enough to give her a good chance going forward. The second issue that I spoke to you about earlier is the issue of her autoimmune implantation problem. I didn't explain that. 50% of women have got antibodies to their thyroid, whether or not they've got full-blown hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's disease, yet will have activation of immune cells in the uterine lining called natural killer cells or NK cells. These cells are good guys. All women must have them. Without them, the embryo will not develop a placenta that grows into the wall of the uterus and that serves as the lifeline for the baby. It won't do it in a proper manner. You've got to have natural killer cells. But in 50% of women who've got autoimmune hypothyroidism, thyroid antibodies, with or without hypothyroidism, there will be activation of these natural killer cells. And they start to release an excess of toxins called Th1 cytokines. Some must be released, but if it's in excess, it attacks the roots of the embryo and destroys it, listen carefully, before the woman even knows she's pregnant. She thinks she's not getting pregnant, but she's having many miscarriages so early, she never knew she was pregnant in the first place. So it's terribly important that we detect whether the woman's got activated natural killer cells. In some cases, the root system of the embryo is traumatized. It's not destroyed. And the embryo limps along till it runs out of steam. And then the embryo is lost as a miscarriage. So to know whether there's activated natural killer cells is important. But this is not a test that can be casually done in any laboratory, any reference laboratory. There are only 4 or 5 labs in the United States that can do it. I sent my patients' bloods to a place called ReproSource in Boston, Massachusetts. And of course, once I consult with you, we will requisition the necessary immune tests to find out if there is an immunologic implantation dysfunction, IID. Because if you've got natural killer cell activation and you've got thyroid antibodies, it's not going to matter what the quality of the embryos are you put back. You can't put a good seed in a bad soil any more than you can put a bad seed in a good soil and expect a healthy outcome. So we would need to treat that. And by the way, the treatment is highly effective, very successful. All we do is infuse a substance into your veins 10 to 14 days before the embryo is transferred, called intralipid, combined with a low-dose steroid, and then repeated once when the pregnancy test is positive and you're off and running. If you do those things, you get to the best way to stimulate the woman to protect the eggs and get the best possible eggs so as to propagate the best possible embryos. And then you place those embryos very delicately into the uterine environment that has been rendered receptive by dealing with any implantation dysfunction. You can expect a good outcome. And this is exactly what I've recommended to Beryl and to Jack. Hopefully they'll take my advice or allow me to talk to their doctor and convince their RE that this is the way they should go. And if they do, I have high hopes that they'll be successful. But they need to do it very quickly because Beryl is running out of time. Her AMH is low, her ovarian reserve is depleting and dropping fast. And so she needs to do this and make hay while the sun shines. She may choose going in to do several cycles to bank and stockpile several embryos for future use. This is called embryo banking. That is a good way to go as well. But this is the general approach that I've recommended. I hope you find that helpful. Now, before you leave me, I want to just introduce you to a lady. Her name is Patty. Patty is my concierge lady. Patty, if you want to see her, Patty, come around the back here. She's doing all the videoing here. And so you can at least say hello so people can see who you are. This is Patty, and you'll be talking to Patty if you call or contact us for a consultation. Patty can be reached by calling her at 702-533-2691. Again, 702-533-2691. That number will reach you from anywhere in the world. If you're in the United States or Canada, you can use the 800 toll-free number, which is 800-780-7437. Again, 780-7437, 800-780-7437. You can call Patty and leave a message on her voicemail if you don't reach her, and she'll call you right back. Be sure to leave your phone number. The better way is to email Patty directly. And so take this down. Her email address is concierge, CONCIERGE, at ShareIVF, SHERIVF.com. Again, concierge at ShareIVF.com. And she'll be very responsive very quickly. Once she gets your name, if you're interested in having a 1-hour Skype consultation with me, she'll schedule you immediately, get you to complete a questionnaire, which she'll send to you. The moment that's completed and you've sent it back to us with as much of your old records as you have available, we'll be able to consult. I'll be able to give you my advice, my opinion, for you to do with what you choose. Thank you very, very much for your interest. By the way, for those of you still there, visit my website, shareivf.com. That's www.shareivf.com. If you go there, you'll see a little banner at the top, and there's a little sign which says Dr. Scher's blogs. Click on that. It'll take you to my blog area where I've published and posted more than 400 articles. All you need to do is to type in the title of the article, the subject matter you're interested in a little search bar that appears on the home page. Click, and you can read it online or download it. I look forward to meeting you. Thank you for your attention.